Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, From Data to Business Value, Unlocking the Power of Data Products in AI. We're thrilled to have you here for what promises to be an insightful and engaging session. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A button to submit them, and we'll address as many as possible during the Q&A portion. Without further ado, I'll pass you over to our moderator, Steve Woolidge. Steve?
Thank you, Colleen. Appreciate that. Hi, everyone. My name's Steve Woolidge. I'm VP of Product Marketing at Alation. I'll be your moderator today, as Colleen mentioned. And I'm super excited to have this strong group of experienced data leaders with us. So before we dive in, I'd just like to give a big thank you to each of them. Rupinder Dhillon, who's VP Enterprise Data at Sobeys. Joe Bonanno, if I'm pronouncing that right, Joe, please correct me.
You got it.
Perfect. Global Head of Data Analytics and Innovation, Citi. Katie Chesney, who's VP of Enterprise Data Product at Kroger 8451. And it's your expertise across you three that's really going to make this discussion real for our audience and give them some key learnings. So thank you again for joining us. And before we dive in with more formal introductions, I want to just set the stage a little bit for our audience. So if you've spent any time in the world of data, you know that getting value from data is one of the most exciting and sometimes challenging opportunities that we face. We've seen a lot of different waves over the decades, from relational databases, data warehouses, business intelligence, Hadoop, big data, cloud, and now AI is just erupting in terms of innovation. So I would argue there's never been a more exciting time, but also high pressure on data teams, because there's so much we can do to drive innovation and business value within our organizations. So it's just a great time to be together to discuss some of these things. And one of the terms I want to unpack on this call is around data products. This is something that's been in the industry for a while. And at a high level, you could say that these are curated, reusable data assets that have a specific business purpose. And some customers even say that data products really bridge from raw data to business value that empowers not only end users, but downstream systems and AI models or other types of applications, which we'll talk about on the call today. So in terms of the flow, I'll moderate a podcast-style panel discussion for about 30 to 40 minutes with our leaders. They'll each share their insights and stories around data products, how it's impacting their business, other types of initiatives they're driving. And after that, I'd love to open it up to the audience and make sure that you have your questions answered as well. So as we go, please go ahead and just type in questions as you think of them into the Q&A panel. I might even surprise some of the panelists with pulling out one of those questions to try and make it as live and interactive as possible. So the goal here is really to make sure that you all get some form of best practices or education around data products and how it supports business, but other types of AI applications as well. And also not the technology, but also the mindset shift around data product management, or how do we think about data as a product or a service that we're delivering to the business. So that's really what I'd love to get into today. So to get started, I'd love to just introduce and have you each share a perspective on data products in your organization. Rupinder, could you start us out, please?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for including me. I'm excited about the conversation, but I'm also incredibly excited about learning from Katie and Joe, because I think, as you'll see, every organization has their own sort of unique perspective on what does a data product mean for their organization. For us, and the way that we've been looking at it is, how do you take, very much to your example or your definition, how do you take our raw system data, how do you enrich it with insights and also analytics, but then also how do you then feed it back into your operational system so that it can actually evolve and change your business? So really, we're looking to take data products from being an insights, reporting, analytics thing, but also something that gets embedded into our operational processes and really changes our business.
Awesome. Joe, could you introduce yourself and give a perspective on data products from where you sit?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, and excited as well to be here. So my name is Joe Bonanno. I head up data analytics and innovation for Citi Wealth. That's a bit of a fancy title, but think of that all forms: data strategy, cloud architecture, analytics, machine learning, Gen AI, visualization, et cetera, et cetera. But to be honest with you, like when I think about data products itself, my original thought maybe 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I'm dating myself. A data product would be a reusable, what I would call data pipeline. So, if we're reporting, as an example, client counts somewhere, rather than have, different folks around the organization try to assemble data sets from different tables and fields and define attributes and filters. We would build what we call data pipelines, and ultimately we would save it as what we would call a data product maybe 5 or 10 years ago, so that other people can have a starting point with control totals and then maybe spin it off into different permutations. Maybe they want to segment it by assets or some other type of metric, but they would have this reusable product. I would argue, though, in my, X number of years doing analytics and data, which is in the 20s, I would say building decision engines to target the right client at the right time with the right opportunity is a machine learning algorithm that can be reused, and it self-learns. That's a data product in my mind. We do a lot with AI in terms of intelligent document automation. So what I mean by that is, rather than have folks read through documents like 30, 40, 50-page PDFs, if we can define the attributes that we want lifted off of that document using like NLP, and being able to reuse it document after document, that becomes a reusable product. There's intelligent assistance. So imagine a little bot that effectively you could, ask like ChatGPT like questions. And in my business in wealth, we have lots and lots of clients globally, but it's like, how do I process a death benefit in Hong Kong, which may be different than in the US? And ultimately it's pointing to those documents, and you could use that intelligent assistant over and over. There's lots and lots of other things like dashboards and other things that are data products, but in my view, it's the landscape of things that are reusable and consumable, and some of them are self-learning and some of them are, one-offs.
That's a great perspective. There's a lot of things I want to ask you about, so we'll come back to some of those. Katie, I'd love to get your intro and point of view.
Absolutely. Katie Chesney, I'm with 8451 in Kroger. So for those of you who do not know, 8451 is the data science and analytical arm of the Kroger company. And I've been with 8451 for the last 8 years, but overall with Kroger in the tech and data space for around 20 years as well. So I think across the three of us, we may be collaborating after this call because of the background and knowledge that we can all learn from each other, which is exciting. How we think about data products, for us, it really, if you think about 8451 and Kroger as a whole, data is the lifeblood of our organization. And years and years ago, it really was viewing data as an asset, more of in the background. How can we pull it into the sciences that we're doing and things like that? And over the years, really kind of adjusting and evolving our mindset to say, how can we improve the trust in that data? Almost to what Joe was mentioning as well, from a reusability factor, whether it's in sciences or from a data product perspective as well, really driving to that reusability. But I think at the root of it, it's how do you actually view that data and tie it to that business value? How do you have a roadmap associated with it? How do you actually have stakeholder conversations around the data producer, data consumer relationship there as well? And actually not just having it be tech owned, but having kind of the business involved in those conversations as well. So for us, it's definitely been a learning experience, but I think being able to kind of take those learnings and pivot throughout the years and really drive where we've seen success has definitely been beneficial.
That's excellent. Yeah. And I think you've each mentioned a little bit about connecting to business value, having business purpose. Are there specific ways that you measure the value of a data product differently from other types of data assets? And I don't know if you could talk about some of that, maybe starting with you, Katie, or if someone else has a point of view on how you measure the value and if it's different from other types of data assets.
Yeah, well, for us, there's kind of two different lenses because 8451 does have two commercial products that we sell externally to CPGs and media agencies. And so from a commercial lens, I say it's easy to tie to business value because it's easy being relative in the sense of it's tied to the bottom line of revenue that's being generated through those commercial sales. And so being able to actually tag the data product of, because it was in this place and it enabled these capabilities, we were able to drive additional sales growth and revenue for the organization. I think having those type of use cases to say, hey, this is what we're striving towards, and this is what we were able to achieve. I say that's the easy part of it. The not so easy part of it is more on the internal side of the house. And when we have something like our analytical core data store, to where it's a number of different business units pull from it. It's an aggregate data product that pulls transaction data, merchandising data, customer data together to kind of create that single source of truth. That becomes a little bit more challenging. But if you kind of take a step back and say, we're actually going to tie it more to savings from a time perspective, or we were able to actually allocate and repurpose time in other places, that's how we've kind of started to look at internal products. So one of the examples that we have a data scientist here. I remember it was right when I started at 8451, I had a conversation with him, and he was like, I'm spending 80% of my time wrangling data and 20% of my time writing data science and models. Like, that's not right. And through the time that we've invested in our data strategy across Kroger and 8451, as well as really solidifying our viewpoint and mobilizing around data products, from a governance perspective, from a knowledge perspective, we've been able to flip those ratios around, which for us, to your point, ties to business value for us, from a time savings and allowing people to actually do the job that we hired them to do.
It's a great example.
Yeah, I can maybe add to Katie's points. I think in our business, which is highly regulated, I think most of your initiatives, either at the start of the year or from years in the past, require some type of cost benefit analysis just to get off the ground, especially if it's something grander. The smaller things, maybe not as much, but every year we go through an exercise of trying to assess, like, what's the revenue benefit to the organization? What's the cost impact in terms of savings, efficiencies, or avoidance? And we actually, ironically, use data to measure the efficacy of these programs or these data products, if you want to call it that. So as an example, if we have folks today that speak on the phone to our clients and afterwards document that in a CRM in a way that's very manual and human in nature to say, hey, I spoke about this, and catalog it. By the way, you're probably missing some things. But if I pivoted and said, hey, we're going to build this LLM to actually take the transcript or real time, summarize that, present it, and inject it automatically into a CRM, for that matter, with some controls and some checks, and then push a button and send an email to the client to say, here's what we talked about. And if I can do that process in seconds, which might take 20 minutes, that's an easy sort of math, right? If I make 5 calls a day times 20, it's 100 minutes. If I have a workforce of 200 people times 250 business days, you can very quickly quantify that. Other things we'll do is more of a sort of regression analysis or data science-like exercise, where if we're targeting a group of clients and we're trying to do something like a hyper-personalized message that, we want to build a data product that is reusable, we would actually say, okay, here's the test group and the control group. Let's figure out who got it, who didn't get it. Let's see who responded. Let's see who transacted. And let's measure what we call lift to see if there was any revenue impact. So for the clients that opened it, not only will we know what time of day they opened it, and we can build your thumbprint in a different data product, I can actually measure the efficacy of that. So we tend to use a lot of data science to support whether or not these products make sense in the future. And if we see that they don't, we sort of move on and move fast and get on to the next thing.
I could just add, I think what Katie and Joe have described very much resonates in some of my previous sort of iterations of this role in previous organizations. I would say in the organization I'm in now, it's sort of a different, the way that we're, I guess, positioning data is slightly differently, where we are tying the data deliverable, the data product deliverable, to the overarching business initiative. So that's the measurement is at that level. that here's the business initiative. It's going to increase sales by this much. It's going to improve margins by X, Y, Z. And what we're delivering from a data product perspective, rather than being its own standalone measurement, is part of that, the delivery of that initiative. So that's really how we've been trying to position data as it's a core part of the deliverable for anything that we want to be able to do. And separately, we have our scorecard to say, look, what value, just so that our team is also feeling motivated and has the right visibility, keeping track of what's the value that we've been helping to drive across all of these different initiatives, right? So again, but I think that's indicative of where the organization is in sort of its data journey, what is most important, and how data weaves into the strategy. So how you measure and track is really going to be different for each organization based on the dynamics.
Can I just add too? I think Rupinder brings up a good point that I didn't really address, which is like it almost has to become part of the DNA or the SDLC in the tech terms, right? So in an SDLC process, right, you're building something, you're prototyping it, you're testing it, you're deploying it, you're UATing it, et cetera, et cetera. Like, but part of that is like upfront, what are the KPIs? How are we going to measure? How are we going to track this? And I think as you sort of evolve as an organization, you just build that in the DNA upfront so that, it's not like, hey, this thing's out there, and now how do we measure it later on? Like, you just make it part of the life cycle.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I was just going to say, for the folks on the call, I feel like it's probably just a note to call out from a best practice perspective, because the way that Rupinder actually described it is exactly how we operate as well. So kind of that tying that into the business and actually having those scorecards are things that we do here. So I think just from like a side note, if you're new to kind of this thinking, that's probably a best practice to note there, because it's definitely a common theme across all of us, it sounds like.
Yeah, and you just mentioned a word, different kind of thinking. So that's another question I have for you is there a mindset shift around thinking about data as a product that's different from how you've delivered data initiatives in the past? I've heard some organizations have what they call data product managers. I've seen where you might have a data steward that sits in the IT side, but maybe there's a business owner that has some other title on the business side. So I'd love to get a perspective on the mindset shift or any kind of roles or responsibility changes that you've tried to implement to support the notion of data as a product.
Yeah, I can start if you'd like. So I think part of it's a bit depending on your organization, right? It's educating people on what this product per se is, and socializing that more broadly, right? And then I do think like how you organize yourself in terms of deliverables or even just education and awareness periodically. There's different stakeholders at different levels, right? You have senior managers who you need to distill things into bullets, where you might have technical folks who need to get a little bit more dirty and ready. But then you need people that visually need to see. And what we've adopted or implemented is, basic agile, where we try to deliver functionality every 2 weeks in what we call sprints. But effectively, we have dedicated owners, both business and tech, responsible for this product, program, application, you name it, that their team gets about a 10-minute slot every 2 weeks. And we have literally 20 different squads. Each squad represents, call it a data product if you want. And they talk about like, here's, the initial one might be, here's what it is and why. And we might even have a business person intelligently explain like, here's what this means to me. But then someone who would show like the prototype, whether it's the wireframes or whether it's the end product or an enhancement at some point, they would actually see with their own eyes. And we invite the entire organization to come to the party to see for firsthand like what's being built. But it's also an opportunity for the rest of the organization to sort of challenge in a healthy tension type way. Like, hey, I get it, but what about this? But those are types of things that you want to park and table in an agile world, put as a user story, and then you'll do sort of your whole grooming sessions later to figure out where that fits in terms of priorities. But it's a way to educate the org. But again, we have discrete owners for each of these products and platforms. that get the opportunity to demonstrate things. I think by doing this, for us at least, right, it also enables others to see the art of the possible, or a question like, wait a minute, I have a similar use case, whether it's a dashboard or whether it's a algorithm or whether it's a like the intelligent assistant I mentioned. When people see it, they're like, oh, I'm doing this, but I'm doing it with this type of data set or whatever. Maybe these guys can help me build it, and it creates more momentum, more capacity. And oh, by the way, when you get in the room and you show senior folks the end product, they are like, okay, guess what? Here's more funding. Do more of this. So it sort of helps on all levels.
Great perspective. Katie or Rupinder, anything you'd want to add to that?
Yeah,
Sorry,
go ahead, Rupinder. No, go ahead. I'll go last.
I was going to say, one, like I agree. What Joe described totally resonates. I think one surprising change, or shift that we saw was, it gave an opportunity for for a data engineering role to be less transactional, meaning here's a pipeline that I have to build, and allowed some of our more technical resources to start learning more about the business and what the data actually represented, and what are the business teams trying to do with it, right? And I think that was a big shift that we are seeing and continue to see with some of our resources who are very technically inclined, but now we're also really trying to push the need to have a much more like a better appreciation and understanding of sort of the retail 101 business side of the house.
And
yeah,
sorry, go ahead, Katie. I know you wanted to
no, I was going to say just quickly to add on to that, because it's a yes and for me for both of those. So we've really had to start to shift our mindset around our operating model, and how we actually think about data products, data in the organization. This ties kind of into what Rupinder was saying from a business perspective as well. We've really focused on how can we actually really define not only the data product manager role, but also what is the data producer role? What is the data consumer role? And how do those act together? Not just on the technology side, but on the business side. So actually having a business owner, and having them responsible and accountable for being a part of these conversations as well. And through that, we've really seen strides to where the business strategy and the tech strategy have become much tighter together, and we're able to talk the same language. And when we talk about things more on a more tech side, the business is able to really start to understand that, and vice versa. To what Rupinder was saying as well is how do we actually have our tech folks be a part of those business conversations and drive some of that forward as well. So for us, I think it's similar to what they were saying, but also just really around how we operate, and not only just the role of the data product manager, but organizationally how we've shifted to align around that as well.
Yeah, I would just one more thing to add, like I think because Katie brings up an important point too, that like if you do this right over time in terms of the operating model, the teams that you're working with, oftentimes, without this, you kind of bring in parties in the 7th, 8th inning of a 9-inning game versus the first inning. And when you have these accountable folks or people aware of how this works, and I'm responsible for this data domain, and here's what it means, before you start to go build something, you're like, all right, let me grab my partners. And sometimes that even includes legal risk and compliance folks to talk about like, hey, here's what we're trying to do. Does this make sense? Do we have the data? What are going to be our controls? And, who owns this? Who's responsible? And then you sort of like, if you do it the right way, I honestly don't think like we all wear, at least at Citi, I have a Citi jersey. On the back might say data analytics, and someone else might say tech, or someone else might say legal. But if we do it the right way, sometimes we don't even know who's on whose team. It's just part of the natural evolution of maturity in terms of like, all right, we're going on to the next thing. Let's get all the group together. Everybody knows their responsibilities, and let's move fast.
Yeah, I like how you described it as a team. I heard you mention the word pod as well. So I'm curious, across your organizations, do you create pods of And is it organized by specific data products, or what type of organizational structure would you recommend at the beginning of a journey? To your point on, we're in the baseball game, you start these conversations across the different functions.
I think it depends on your organization and even potentially some of your initiatives and responsibilities, of which you either support or you're building net new. So in my organization, I'll just give some examples, right? So we have dedicated data squads, and we have squads focused on very specific column categories, right? So I'm responsible for the investment squad. And within that squad, you have product owners, business analysts, developers, UAT folks, and what we'll call Scrum Master to do program management. But that entire squad's job is to say, how do I onboard, ingest, curate, stamp, catalog data with data quality rules in a sort of cloud-based architecture? And we might have different squads for different sort of, deposits and this and this. Then we'll have like even squads for building dashboards, right? So a lot of people, we've kind of democratized data like most, which is like, hey, go play with data, go build your own dashboard in a trusted, governed way. But when it comes to productionalizing it with security and entitlements and optimizing the SQL, hand it over to the data squad, and they'll figure out how to instantiate it into the ecosystem and make it connect to all the different right interfaces. But there's a dedicated data squad there. We also have Gen AI squads that are working on very specific use cases. And some of them might be, how do we take, sort of an unstructured document and convert it into a distilled voice that explains this thing to a human in a 2-minute kind of conversation that while they're riding the subway, they can hear. Or it can be sort of like a chat bot. We call it Ask Wealth here. So I can just say which of my clients are exposed to a certain security, which of my clients have too much cash, which of my clients haven't I called them. There's squads building like these products per se. And then we have other things doing decision engines. It really depends on your framework and your org, but we've kind of have, I think, 20 squads across my sort of data analytics and AI platforms team. But again, I'm responsible for all those things. Whereas, in a previous role, I might have been just a data person and doing cloud. So I may not have all that, but we tried to optimize it that way.
Got it. Other points of view on squads? I said pod earlier, I meant squads, but how are you organized?
I say slightly different in the sense of, we are really trying to drive forward more of a hybrid model. I say similar, but slightly different in the sense of, we are absolutely running in an agile pod format. We have our business team, or we have our tech teams aligned to our business teams. But from a data perspective specifically, we have a kind of thin layer in the middle that is setting those best practices, those guardrails, the direction and the vision for the data strategy itself, as well as some of the recommendations from like a data governance perspective, some of the tooling and patterns that we want to follow from that perspective. So we have ultimately some decisions and some ownership from a data product perspective sitting in that center layer. However, we are not a completely centralized data organization where all data is owned centrally. We are federated to where our tech teams who are working directly with our business teams also own data products within their tech pillars as well. So there's that partnership, and we call them data champions, to where we're able to keep the data strategy connected to the business teams, but they're able to move at a speed that matters for the business and whatnot as well. So very much, yes, we have the pods that we have certain data products that are owned centrally in that thin layer. But then we also operate from a more of a federated perspective where those pods exist at the tech level that then partner with the business teams.
Cool. Rupinder, anything you want to share in terms of your org?
Yeah, no, not much to add. Katie, that's super interesting. Like, I think that is the great example of like, how do you organize for scale, right? And it sounds that that's really the path that you push down on an org structure that really allows you to scale and move fast. The only thing I would add is like the big shift that we made about a year ago, because as this amalgamated data team formed, is it was very much, I think, sectioned off by data functions. So there was one team that was doing all the data governance and data quality, one team that was dedicated to all things data engineering, another team that was dedicated to all things platform and architecture. And the one big shift that we made was to separate the teams by more the business function, very similar to Joe and Katie that they support. So now there's, merchant supply chain, and then everything that is needed for data governance, data solutions, data engineering lives in that team. Again, so that our teams get much more familiar with the business functions that they're supporting and partnering with. And we've seen that model, while you have to do additional work to ensure that there's common standards across those teams, there's common platforms, and everything is done in a similar way, it does give those teams a lot more autonomy to just run fast and work at the pace that our business partners are working at.
Good perspective. I want to ask, there's a question that came in from the audience, which I think is relevant here. And I think we touched on this a little bit, but I'm going to hit this button that says answer live, but it says, how do you bake in accountability for data products from the business side, where business stakeholders are sometimes intimidated by the language data teams speak and they shy away from accountability, assuming it will be very technical? And this is something I've seen. We had a customer advisory board in New York a couple of months ago, and this alignment with the business and like getting them to be part of the team was a challenge we had heard. So I'd love any perspective on, again, to the question of how do you bake in accountability for data products from the business side? If anyone wants to touch on that.
We're actively doing this.
Go for it. Go for it, Katie.
Sorry, Joe.
No,
yeah,
you go for
I was going to say, we are literally actively working on maturing in this space. So we recently created, over the last 6 or 7 months, what we refer to as our data maturity scorecard. And the entire goal of it is really to measure that business engagement. And we came up with 6 different metrics, and it's really just to create visibility across the senior officer team and Kroger's CEO, because they are really bought into wanting to really drive more value through AI. And I think we all know, if you want to get the most out of value out of AI, you really need to have a strong data foundation in place. And so the metrics are tied to how can we make sure that we're incrementally improving that data foundation. And a big part of that is the business engagement part. So an example of some of the metrics that are on there are really aligning to how we think about data quality. So in a tech world, we're going to think about what are some of the quality checks that we typically put in place that may be and is very different than how a business person actually would say, what is the quality of a certain data product? And so it's measuring that engagement and conversation across the business and the tech team, really to show that there's evolution towards the data strategy that we're driving towards and improving that foundation. So for us, it's been beneficial because it really highlighted support and initiative from the senior officer team. And then they identified kind of a point of contact within our business teams, which then were a common voice out to the business teams as a whole to drive some of the conversations that we really want to kind of progress forward there.
I would just say it's definitely a cultural shift for organizations to embrace accountability with respect to data. I think, those that aren't, maybe at the level of maturity that, one would want to be, oftentimes it's like, wait a minute, that's the data team's job, or that's the tech team's job. And when you think about the terms that, are thrown out there, like producer and consumer and all this fun stuff, you have to distill this to business folks in a way that resonates. So as an example, it's like, wait a minute, you guys are offering this product. How many applications do you have? 20, 30? Okay. Are they documented in a catalog that, one can trace in case, something happens? And who's the tech owner and who's the business owner of that application? What are inside that application in terms of, now we're really talking here though about data strategy and data governance, less about data products, but let's just keep on the theme of data strategy and governance. But what are the critical data elements in there? Meaning, if this thing failed, what would we have to make sure is fortified and would be up and running the next day? And it could be a logical formula, or it could be an actual registered data element that goes to a financial reporting package or general ledger statement or whatnot. But then it's almost like, what are the controls and what are the data quality rules? And, which of those data elements have actually controls and rules? And you almost, to Katie's point, you can build a scorecard to educate people, but embracing that as, hey, it's my responsibility. It starts at the top of the house. I would say culturally, I think your organization's leader has to sort of understand this and get it, and then also apply, I don't want to use the word pressure, but, make sure people have dedicated folks within the business teams that are accountable and know that, hey, we have an issue right now. We're going to come to you. You need to help, maybe not solve it like with your hands, but help us navigate the organization. And it's a lot easier when you have it documented, and I can see what's inside the system, and I can see the logic, and I can see the rules. Let me start to do my triaging. But again, we're talking data strategy, data governance. Data products to me is more like, all right, we built this thing, right? Let's just use a visualization or a dashboard. It's an interactive dashboard. Those are a lot easier to explain to business people. But they'll still come back and say, oh, no, you're the tech person or the business data person, and if it's broken, you go fix it. So it's no. We're building this for you. It's your teams, right? You have to also guide us in terms of enhancements. Who are the audience? What questions are you trying to solve? Let's start with the business problem. But this is yours. It's not mine. I'm here to help you. But the more they feel accountable and the more they feel like they're driving it with you as partners, I think they embrace it more. And it's they love getting, I don't need any credit, so I don't want to be in a room presenting. I'd rather have them be on a stage. It's more impactful to them to talk to their organization about, hey, we're working with these teams, these data teams, but guess what? We're building this for our business or for our clients, and here's what it looks like. And they can even do the demo with a dashboard. It's a lot easier to explain. Whereas the data strategy, data governance is a bit of a dry topic and takes a bit of time for maturity to get accountability.
You're getting a lot of thumbs up and hearts and everything else. It sounds like you hit on a nerve here in terms of that, the business of hey, we're building it for you. It's not just ours to fix, right? We're in a team together. I think that's what I'm sensing people are responding to. That's really cool. Anything else you would add, Rupinder?
It's interesting that Joe tied it back to sort of data governance and data quality, because that's this topic is where that first surfaced, right? And we had to get to a point where we told the data team, you can't use any data jargon. You can't use the word governance. You can't use the words critical data elements. Let's start the conversation with the business of where they are, the business processes that they understand. So if you're having a conversation that is working with a merchandiser around what are your critical data elements versus, hey, what information do you need about a supplier? Otherwise, you are not able to fulfill assortment or add things, but really putting it in the language that they understand. And the truth is, especially when it comes to data quality, they're living the pain every day, right? So if you bring this to them in a language that resonates with them, they are more than eager and willing to jump in, because they also understand their role in the context of the role they already play. And that data is just a part of the role that they already play. I think sometimes as data people, we have a tendency to come in with super data heavy jargon, and that can be incredibly intimidating, but coming in with the language that they speak. And our CTO has been really, really great about spreading the message across all of our technology teams. Yes, we're technologists, but we're retailers, right? We should all be considering ourselves retailers first. Mm-hmm. And so making sure that everything that we do, like I said, is embedded in that same language.
I love that on the language, that you're getting a lot of hearts and thumbs up as well too, and being able to come to them and speak in their language versus things like critical data elements or whatnot. Not that those aren't important, but it's just translating that for the business. That's awesome. Yeah, we're getting a lot of great questions here. I want to go back. You did, and maybe it's not the sexy part, but you talked about governance, and we have some questions on what's the difference between a data product and other types of assets. Do you think about governance differently when you think about delivering a data product? Joe, I'm thinking of one of your examples where you're talking about some of these generative AI applications and sending summaries back to potentially, I don't know if it potentially goes to end user customers, but is there a different bar that you need to set for a data product or AI system, et cetera, that you factor into your your pods, your squads, and the data products you're building?
The answer is 1000% yes. Especially when it comes to even just the word AI, right? It raises a lot of sort of questions. But I would say for us, it comes in the form of legal risk and compliance. And what I mean by that is controls. So what are your controls to ensure that, you're not, like as an example, like if you're recording a conversation, where's the privacy sort of, in this in terms of like, okay, in the US, you can do this and you can't do this, or you have to disclose this up front with a button. What are your controls in place to sort of show that you actually have this data product under control? And I'm just talking about just the recording. Then there's like, okay, where's this data going? Who's using it? What if somebody says something throughout the conversation? How long can we store that data? From a data sort of risk perspective, what's the profile of this initiative? But like to me, like we often engage with our legal risk and compliance partners on these types of data products at the onstart of any initiative. I can just tell you, last week we had a kickoff with about 30 people in the room for a couple of very interesting initiatives where the first thing I was like, where's my legal risk compliance, internal audit teams, surveillance teams, and everyone? Because some of the Gen AI stuff could be foreign for folks or new, just because at the pace it's moving. But also, like, if we're going to shape this, we're not going to just roll this out big broad brush either. Let's do it in a test and learn internal kind of phase first, but let's build all the right guardrails and controls and processes in place to be able to audit it ultimately on a recurring basis. I think I also saw a question around like, how do you sort of like, look at these periodically? But that's what we do, right? We'll sort of test the controls we have set up for this application or product to make sure it's actually delivering the expected outcomes. And that could be, is the algorithm off, right? If you think about Netflix, right, and you watch a movie and, it sort of makes the recommendation to watch this next. Like, there's a bit of machine learning in that, but at the same time, somebody's got to say, like, you just watch this Rocky movie with Sylvester Stallone, it's action, it's 2 hours, et cetera, et cetera. And if you watch nothing else, it probably should recommend like a Rocky 2, or maybe something else with Sylvester Stallone. But if it starts to go off to like Bambi, like it's like, wait a minute, where's the algorithm? Did it pull in some data that it shouldn't have to sort of make that recommendation? Like, let's test and learn, let's figure this out. So I think there's a lot more scrutiny, there's a lot more controls, but a product like that certainly has to have like full support and partnership with your legal risk compliance teams.
Great point of view. Anything you'd want to add, Rupinder or Katie, around governance of data products, how it might be different from other types of data assets?
I just think it's increased. Like there's when it comes back to thinking about data in the organization versus really promoting and pushing something as a data product, I think there's an increased level of trust that's needed there. And I think one of the kind of the lessons learned for us over time has been, when you think about how you're implementing governance across data products, almost that build versus buy approach. At first, we thought we had to build everything internal, and we've obviously taken a step back from that and really started to evaluate what actually gives us that competitive edge that we should build internal. But where should we then partner with kind of best of the breed vendors that are out there? Obviously, it's not a secret. We partner with Alation on data discoverability within Kroger and 8451, and it's been an amazing relationship that's helped us accelerate from a discoverability standpoint. So I think for us, it really boils down to that sense of trust that it really comes into, and how governance and those practices and how we've implemented them and changed throughout the time has really helped us in that process.
Thanks for that.
The only thing I would add is I think there's been several instances where our AI data products have actually allowed us or given us an opportunity to reinforce why governance and quality is important, because it's directly related to the efficacy of the algorithm and the output, right? And the accuracy and the ability to scale it. So we actually use that as a bit more of a momentum builder around why governance and quality and ownership is important in areas and data assets that hadn't had it before, because now those data assets are being used in a completely different way. So it can also be used as a catalyst in that area as well.
Awesome. This is great. Yeah, we're getting a lot of comments and questions as well. People are commenting that 100% agree to start with the business problem we're trying to solve and show how it can be fixed in a non-techie way. Business translation is key. Going back to some of your comments earlier, Rupinder. Um, I think somebody mentioned lessons learned. I'd love to sort of my last question, and we'll open it up to some of these others that I'm seeing coming in is, what are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen organizations make, or maybe you've made yourself in embracing data products? Are there ways to avoid it, or other types of best practices you've seen or implemented that you could share with our audience? Anyone want to start with that? Rupinder, you were mentioning earlier some of your perspective. I don't know if it's lessons learned. You were talking about other types of operational applications and things. I'm not sure if it's related to that, or do you want to start?
I think that I think there's, and we were talking about a risk around how data teams operate in general, whether it's for, you're implementing a brand new data platform, or it's specifically around deployment of data products. Just to really avoid the risk of your data team becoming disconnected with your business functions. I've seen so many projects that almost turn into, data vanity projects, right? Or technical vanity projects, right? We want to overhaul our infrastructure, overhaul our data platform. Like if you have to keep justifying why you're doing what you're doing, and you can't point to business value, then I think you got to take a step back and say, like, wait a minute, like, has my data strategy and my roadmap become disconnected with immediate business value? And I think the same thing applies for data products. There's also examples where, a data science team will build a great algorithm, and then you're out looking for a customer across your organization to actually use it. And so just really making sure that this is, you set yourself up in a way that this is a pull from your business or functional counterparts, and not always a push.
I would just add to Rupinder's points, like in terms of lessons learned, or I think maybe it's more approach. So again, we talked about the business problem, which makes 1,000% sense, right? But I think there's a bit of a socialization effort and discovery that, versus rushing to go build something. I remember many moons ago, like I could, have this problem and I can give it to 10 different people, and they can probably build it 10 different ways, and some might be more eloquent or faster, and some might be prettier. But the reality is you kind of need to talk to people and say, hey, here's what I'm doing. Is there anything in my company? We have, a couple 100,000 people in 110 countries. Has anybody done this before in any way, shape, or form? Do we have any tools like that are out of the box versus like we have to start from scratch? Do we have funding? Do we have support? Do we have people with needs or client demand for this? And then there's a bit of like, let me socialize that with senior leaders and others to organize people. And oftentimes the data team, because of its DNA, sits horizontal to the rest of the organization. And we actually end up being sometimes the teams that bring others together who are in different verticals or silos that don't necessarily talk to each other. So I would just argue, like, take the time and energy to do your due diligence, raise awareness about what you're doing, bring together people to, understand the business value. Like I said earlier, do your cost benefits and fun stuff before you get dirty. If you on the side can build like a prototype, some wireframes to show people and they start to understand it, great. As I said earlier, bring your LRC partners in very early, right? The last thing you want to do is be like ready to push this out, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, this is PII, and how do we have controls on this? And, is it documented? And you sort of, you'll have to sort of start all over, or, you end up having to explain things that you could have explained months ago and brought them on the build with you versus at the end of the game. So to me, it's more about your approach and how you operate, I think, with respect to building something new from a data product perspective.
Great perspective. Anything to close us out on the topic of lessons learned, Katie?
Yeah, we've hit on obviously business involvement, business understanding for the last hour. So I absolutely agree. I think that's a very significant lesson learned over the last several years for us. However, the other thing I will call out, and I think Joe has said it a couple times, we have a very similar mindset when we say test and learn. And I call out the lesson learned being, don't be afraid to pivot. If you're trying something and it's not working, try something new and really test and learn and see what's going to work for your organization, because where we ended up, where we started versus where we are today versus where we will end up will be significantly different than what we ever anticipated. Really because of that constant evaluation of what is working from an organizational perspective, from a cultural perspective, but also from a consumption and a business value perspective, actually tied directly back to the data products themselves. So we're not going to have it all right the first go around. So challenge yourself, challenge the people around you to really just reevaluate and say, are we headed in the right direction? Are we getting what we want out of this? And if not, then try something new.
Awesome.
Course correct as often and frequent as you can.
Awesome. Okay. And I'm going through the questions here. We've got a bunch. I'm just going to throw this slide up since we are into the audience Q&A portion. We are Alation. We do data products, data cataloging, and data governance. If you want to learn more about what we do, see it in action, you can access some of this information there. If you want to reach out to me personally, that's great too. I want to go back to, there's a question that came in. We've talked a lot about team structure, but, and Joe, you mentioned that in some cases you're like, you didn't say matchmaking, but you're connecting teams that otherwise wouldn't have been talking. Is there an ultimate, like, who does this report to? A data squad or a data product squad? Is it up to the CTO? Is there something in the business side that owns these? I'm just kind of curious from an accountability up the food chain, if you will.
Yeah.
How do you structure others?
Yeah, look, I've been in different places and we've done it different ways. I would say the sort of data and analytics world has gotten to a bit of a gray area, but in a good way, meaning who's on the business side and who's on the tech side. And, some data and analytics teams report to the tech team, some report to business folks, some report to heads of businesses, you name it. I would say in our organization, I'm on the business side. I've been in tech for 10, 15 years, doing everything from programming, coding, web design, database development, architecture, kid in a candy store. I also worked in finance on the business side, so I can speak that language as well. So I'm a bit of a hybrid. But that sort of entire data squad, what we call fleet, which is a collection of squads, reports directly into me. However, I would argue that I have a very strong tech counterpart who all the tech resources within those squads that are commingled with my team report in directly to that tech owner. But as far as the driver, the orchestrator, the delivery, it sits with me on the business side. That's actually a lot more helpful because business side tends to have the funding and the muscle to get things done, whereas tech side is, sort of needs to work with the business to get the approvals. It's a lot easier for me just being a translator between tech and business to be able to explain it to either end. But as far as the operating model goes, it kind of sits in my org on the business side.
Got it. Katie, I heard you mention scorecards up to the CEO. Is there accountability for data products up at that level, or how are you all structured?
Yeah, so we are actually structured to where the data product teams report in through technology. However, obviously we have representation through our CIO and some of our senior leaders on our senior officer team. And so that's how we've kind of driven that accountability is through the CEO and the senior officer team to then drive obviously just the continued partnership. It was there previously, but it also highlights some of the importance when it's coming from the senior officer team as well. So yeah, slightly different than how Joe's structured, but I've been places where it's been structured similar to Joe and different. There's pros and cons to both. I think you just have to learn and kind of see where there are things that are working, where there might be gaps. And to be honest, I think the common theme of really trying to bring together, whether it's strong tech folks with strong business folks and vice versa, meeting there in the middle is ultimately where I think the right answer is, whether it reports into the business or tech. Having that kind of magical combination, if you will, I think is kind of the sweet spot.
Okay. Rupin, anything else to add on org and how it reports up?
Yeah, I've seen it work in different forms. Again, it really depends on the org. In our structure, we have a chief technology and analytics officer, which brings together both the traditional CIO function, the CTO function, the analytics and data function, as well as the security and cyber function. I think that bringing all of those together, which is fairly new for us, I removed a lot of the friction points that existed previously, and has just allowed us to move faster. And then obviously making sure that there's good business ownership across the business teams as well.
Okay, great. Last question. We got 4 minutes left. We'll see how long this takes, but I'm going to go a little bit technical. There's a couple questions I've seen come in about, are data products just for structured data, or are you also incorporating unstructured data? The second half of that question is, are there any strategies or best practices organizations can adopt to enrich data assets with more semantic context? I think especially, I'm adding editorial here, but ensuring AI agents gain a deeper understanding of organizational knowledge, which may not sit, let's say, in a database. Are there other ways to enrich that semantic context to help drive more effective process automation? So context, semantics, unstructured data, what are all the, I guess, components that you would feed into an AI product, let's say, where you're changing some other requirements? I don't know if anyone has a perspective they want to share on that.
Yeah, I'll start. So it's all the above in terms of data, right? So structured, semi-structured, unstructured. Honestly, unstructured is a bit easier, personally. So if you have documents, let's just say somebody wrote a research report about a particular security, came from a business analyst, or maybe it's an SEC filing that's public. It could be anything. Pointing to that using like a large language model, RAG with guardrails, and a bunch of other, like, honestly, just Gen AI isn't just, hey, it's just not an LLM. There's a bunch of components similar to when you're building a cloud architecture with data services, data distribution, data pipelines, different zones and regions and all that. Like, AI actually has a bunch of components too, in terms of security, connecting to data, guardrails, rules, LLMs to do things. So from my perspective, unstructured is pretty straightforward, because if you use a concept called RAG, you're pointing specifically to that document or a set of documents, and it's only pulling and distilling and summarizing from that. But you can also sort of not use RAG and have it, based on what it was trained on, pull other information. So if you ask, like, who's the CEO of XYZ company, depending on when that model was last trained, it may give you the right answer or not the right answer. Whereas, if you're pointing to something unstructured that you're using RAG, it's there. So you have the right controls. But then ultimately you may say, okay, what's the price target of security XYZ? And summarize, what we think about it in terms of my industry, which is about investments and helping people with their wealth. But at the same time, you may say, okay, as a financial advisor, what's the price target of XYZ stock? And oh, by the way, who are my 10 clients that hold it, and who haven't I called in the last 30 days, right? So now you're mixing structured data and tables with trades, transactions, positions, and balances by client with a unstructured document on a research repository. But ultimately, you sort of need to have the right controls and processes in place. So anyway, the answer is we're using all three. Now, when it comes to sort of, attributes and metadata and semantics and business language, you absolutely have to train your models on that, right? So in my business, if I were to use the word rate, right, in an old school ontology world where I'm trying to build a chatbot, I'd have to figure out what are the words alongside a rate to let this sort of chatbot understand that this is about financial products. Because it could be interest rate, there could be savings rate, but then there's also like, how do you rate me on a scale of 1 to 10 rate, right? So teaching the language of both your company as well as maybe your business requires training the model. And a lot of that times it has to do with metadata tags and things of that nature. But to be honest with you, that's where large language models come in, because they can do word association on billions of attributes historically to almost automatically know, like, okay, by saying rate my account, the word account and rate, automatically it knows that this is financial. So, but you have to test those things. You have to, see what it comes back with. It's not always that easy, but the semantics and the metadata attributes around your data is really critical.
Okay, awesome. I know we're just at time. Rupinder or Katie, anything you want to close on the topic of other types of data, metadata, context, anything?
I feel like Joe covered it.
All right. Well, thank you very much to all the audience that joined us today. Hopefully you got some great nuggets of wisdom from these excellent panelists. Thank you very much, Rupinder, Katie, and Joe, for your time today. I really enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully everyone else did as well. So if you have any questions, reach out. Otherwise, have a great rest of the week. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.